This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is Jacob's Ladder 2019, directed by David Rosenthal, which is a remake slash reboot of the movie directed by Adrian Lyne in 1990. And this version of Jacob's Ladder is pretty good, but there's some huge caveats. But I should mention that when you say you love a movie from 15, 20 years ago, whatever, the thing is, you have to understand is that you're dealing with memory when that happens. And the thing about memory is, besides being inherently false, when you see something is just as important as the movie itself. Some movies, for instance, are very formative. You see them at a certain point, at a certain place in your life where they take on a value and preeminence that's way out of proportion to the movie itself. For instance, for me, Tron by Steven Lisberger is probably one of the best movies I've ever seen. The thing is, Tron hit me at a particular point in my life where it made this remarkable impression upon me. Let's look at another Disney film, in fact, The Black Hole. I love The Black Hole. I think it's great. The thing is, having seen A Black Hole recently, The Black Hole is not a great movie. The acting is wooden, some of the special effects are a bit wonky, the story doesn't really make a lot of sense, science is thrown out the window on numerous occasions, though I stand by the ending. I honestly think The Black Hole has one of the best endings in sci-fi movie history. It is that good. Well, I should say, it's not really the ending, it's leading up to the ending though. It's just so excellent and just so bizarre. I love that movie. Or, let's look at something else entirely. Exorcist II, The Heretic. I love that movie. I think it's great. Exorcist II, The Heretic is not a great movie. It's weird. That's what I love about it. But in any case, it's weird. It's in some odd way not really related to the movie that it is supposedly a sequel to. It's a very strange movie. But my God, I love Exorcist II, The Heretic, and no one's going to change my mind on that. I think it's awesome. I think it's great. But I also understand it's not a great movie. It's a great movie for me because it came at a place in my life that it really inspired me. And for whatever reason, it works. Jacob's Ladder, the Adrian Lyne movie. I don't actually recall it. Well, the broad details I recall, but the movie itself I don't. But I do recall it being very well done and very clever, and the movie playing games with your perception of what was going on in it, in the sense that you don't know if Jacob, played by Tim Robbins, was actually going crazy. Was he imagining these things? Was he not imagining these things? The movie just was very well assembled. At least I recall it being well assembled. And my memories of it are of a very good, tight, mind-trippy, concise movie. With the reboot, it doesn't quite work as well. I don't think that David Rosenthal is as adept a director as Adrian Lyne. He does what he does quite well, or I should say well enough. It's fine, visually speaking. Acting speaking, it's also quite good. The thing is, though, the story doesn't really make sense, in the sense that there's a twist to it. And this twist is the pivot in which all things revolve around. I'm not going to tell you what the twist is because it's well worth seeing, but at the same time, as the reboot of a movie I recall being much better, it doesn't really work. And that's the biggest problem with this movie. It's not in the direction, it's not in the acting, both of which are good. It's the writing. I see what they're trying to do, because at the same time, if you essentially copy the original Jacob's Ladder, people are going to criticize you for copying. Conversely, if you make a new version of Jacob's Ladder that's entirely different from the original, there's the potential for criticism there as well. So what do? You essentially take the idea of Jacob's Ladder and make it new by changing certain aspects of that narrative. And that it does pretty well. I don't say that it's not a well-done movie, because it is. But it doesn't really make sense. I watched it a second time looking for the point where this should have veered, where that twist would make itself apparent. There are little points where things aren't quite as they should be. Characters say things that, without context, don't quite make sense, but there's not enough of them to indicate where this movie ends up. And that's its greatest problem. It doesn't really make sense. The ending is interesting. The movie is, in fact, interesting. But once you see it all, it kind of comes apart. And the original Jacob's Ladder does not. It actually, once again, I'm recalling it from 10 or 15 years ago, but it held together much better than this movie does. So you could do worse than watching the reboot of Jacob's Ladder. It's not as satisfying or as mind-trippy as the original, but it's pretty well assembled. This was not released in theaters as far as I'm aware, or it was a very limited release. And that's a pity, because it's a pretty decent movie. It's certainly no worse than a lot of the other stuff that actually gets a theatrical release. I would have liked to have seen this movie in theaters because it's interesting. It doesn't quite work. Once again, its story doesn't quite hold together, but that doesn't make it bad. And certainly I think it's better than 9/10 of the stuff that does appear in theaters. This is Brian with screenfiles.com and review. Peace. And I always forget to mention this, but if you like this video, consider it a like and even following the channel.